Back to me when I can move it.
That, but all I have are the two messages, which
Sure.
is just procedural at this point. Yeah. So, ag bogad raya nish, go dí tharishkint module ober holupa agus keen ober, motion flexible and remote work under private members' businesses. And I'm calling on the first speaker to move the motion.
Thank you very much. I move the motion. Nowhere is the innate conservatism of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil more evident than in this government's approach to the question of flexible work. We were told that the pandemic had changed everything, that nothing would ever be the same again, that a new Ireland would emerge from the ashes of the epoch-shaping disruptor that is COVID-19, that a new deal for working people, taking into account the lessons and the experiences of the pandemic, and indeed the innovative ways that workers, the state and businesses responded would be forged. Now, based on the evidence so far, in the Labour Party's judgment, the government has failed its very first test. Based on the toothless legislation that was presented in recent weeks, it's a case of back to the future. I genuinely wish, Minister, that we did not have to bring this motion to the floor of the Dáil today, and we do so more in sorrow than in anger. Now, for some years now, and well before the pandemic hit, I and my Labour Party colleagues have been debating in this chamber and writing in the media about the next frontiers of workers' rights. And before the 2020 general election, Labour produced a document entitled Getting Ireland Moving, a Smarter Way to Work. It envisaged new opportunities for remote working, properly regulated within a statutory framework, which would help to cut the commute, bring about a better work-life balance, help our environment, sustain our communities and allow workers and businesses at the same time to be more productive and flexible. Now, we argue too for evidence-based ideas around a shorter working week and a right to switch off, making the point that far from liberating us from work, the devices that we have in our hands constantly meant that we were always on. Minister, technology should work for us. Instead, it can and does enslave us. The gains that workers, unions and the Labour Party have extracted over the last century and more are in danger of being lost as new ways of working take hold. And the notion of the traditional employment model is fraying at the edges. Now, we aren't Luddites either. We're progressives. Ireland and Irish-based firms are at the cutting edge of innovation. And the 9-to-5 job doesn't suit everyone. And for some, the idea of a job for life spooks them. Society has changed, and so has the expectations of workers and citizens, and that's often no bad thing. The ideas we've been positing for years now were previously dismissed as the musings of lunatics, that we were seeking some kind of a utopia. But then 2 years ago this month came the lockdown. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of commuters set up shop at the kitchen table or the box room. There was an overnight revolution. Companies, the civil and public services and employees who could work from home adapted, and they adapted by and large very well. Flexible and remote work issues became the issue du jour. It was now a mainstream, real-world issue. And workers showed themselves to be as productive, if not more so, when working from home or working remotely from a hub. Citizens reported better balance in their lives. The Environmental Protection Agency reported less carbon emissions, workers were less stressed, those with caring responsibilities liked what they saw. Remote working works, and it works for everyone. And what's more, the demand is there. The demand for remote working in Ireland is among highest in the OECD. And of those in employment who can work remotely, 88% of those who answered a recent Indeed survey said that they would like to do so when all the pandemic restrictions are removed. And consider this too, Minister. Searches for jobs in Ireland permitting remote work were 6 times higher in December 2021 than before the pandemic. I think that speaks for itself. And employers who I speak to on a daily basis, large multinational corporations in my own constituency and elsewhere, tell me now that it is those who provide structured remote working opportunities who will win the war for talent in what is, as we know, a very tight labour market. Now, yesterday we celebrated International Women's Day, and too often women in Ireland have been forced to choose between a family and career, and that is simply not on. The underrepresentation of women in the labour force is a social travesty, and it is a massive economic and fiscal problem. Greater access to the labour market for all citizens is crucial to our productivity and our overall economic and social success. And without the right to flexible work, and indeed the provision of affordable universal public childcare, we are shamefully writing too many talented, hard-working women out of our labour force. And these figures do not lie. Over the 2 years that spanned the first phase of the pandemic, 2020 and 2021, full-time female employment increased by 7%, or 56,000, while part-time female employment has risen by 10%, or 34,000. So nearly 90,000 women were able to enter the workforce, Minister, at a time when many citizens were losing their jobs. Well, many of these women haven't been attracted into the labour force by the working from home arrangements forced on companies by the pandemic, which allowed them to balance then their work with other responsibilities. Now, if the government's so-called right to request legislation goes unamended, once again, many of these women will be, in effect, forced out of the workforce. And in a poll conducted recently by Ireland Thinks on behalf of the Labour Party, some 81% of women surveyed believe workers should have a right to flexible work. Now, let us be in no doubt that the issue of remote work is a gender issue, and it needs to be accepted as such by government. I simply couldn't believe, Minister, what I read when I saw the draft heads of the bill from the Taoiseach that were published recently. It was frankly bizarre. It was quite extraordinary. No lessons whatsoever had been learned from the pandemic. Government tries to sell it as a right to request remote working framework. It's nothing of the sort. Nothing of the sort. In fact, it is a charter for refusal. That's what it is. It's toothless, it's anemic, and it should be scrapped. What made it worse was that it came around the same time as thousands of my constituents were literally dragged back into city centre offices, instructed to go back to the office, and at a time when the cost of filling the car went stratospheric. And indeed, almost in the very same week, when the National Transport Authority responded to me saying that they decided that now was not the time and they couldn't proceed with the promised flexible tax saver ticket that would respond to the needs of workers in the situation that we were in at present. Now, commuters who had successfully worked from home for 2 years told me that they felt cheated. They felt absolutely cheated on so many fronts. The gains and the progress made over the last 2 years, they just counted for nothing. The draft legislation that the government produced says in effect that you could ask to work remotely, but your boss could tell you to go and whistle, and you'd have no right to challenge the grounds for refusal. That is frankly bizarre. This proposed legislation was even more favourable to the unenlightened employer than the laws proposed by the Tory party, and that's an objective fact, and legal academics have made that very point. And central to the success of a balanced legislative solution should be the idea that the recorded experience over the last 2 years should be enabled to be considered when a request to work remotely is to be made. Now, with my own experience in this field, I know that the concept of a defined reference period in employment rights legislation is well established. And I want to make a particular reference to one piece of legislation that was recently passed in these houses. And it's the Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 2017. It's a prime example. Now, this was the culmination of a process that the Labour Party initiated in 2014 to better regulate low and uncertain hours contracts. And a key feature of this legislation is the averaging out of hours worked over a period of 12 months in order to establish which band of hours you ought to be placed in when your contract is being considered. Now, this works very well. And I say this, Minister, for this reason, because this approach needs to be adopted too in the context of the legislative and regulatory approach to flexible work, where a proven ability to work successfully from home over the last 2 years must inform this process. And without the consideration of those kinds of elements in a bill, then the bill will simply be toothless and will not work. The gains from the last 2 years cannot be squandered. Now, you'd be better off giving this frankly useless government bill a decent burial, accept this motion and the principles that inform it, and adopt indeed the draft legislation from my colleague Senator Marie Sherlock, if the government is serious about making remote working work for everyone. Now, as much as the government appears to want it, the clock simply cannot be wound back to 2019. Minister, the people and many good employers have moved on. I move the motion.
Like Deputy Nash, I represent a constituency where we watch and are among tens of thousands of people who get up in the morning, get onto overcrowded trains, get onto packed buses which go onto overcrowded and packed roads, or get into personal cars in order to be able to get to work or get to school or get to college. Since the lifting of restrictions, workers throughout the country have been told to return to the office in their droves. Many people who had worked from home during the pandemic and had swapped their bus or car commute for a morning walk, some time with the family, or indeed an extra, a much needed hour in bed, now find themselves taking to personal and public transport again at ungodly hours. In practical terms, this means that the start and the end of thousands of people's days will be spent stuck in traffic or in overcrowded public transport, which is eroding morale and, of course, damaging our planet. Commuting wasn't working for workers before COVID-19. It was absolutely chaos. And for the thousands of commuters that leave Dublin Fingal every day, or County Louth, or indeed Wexford, Kildare, or any area around our major cities, this is a case of back to the future. The promise that everything would change and nothing would be the same has been absolutely obliterated by the last few weeks. 1 in 10 workers spend over an hour travelling to work daily, with commuters losing on average 5 hours every week stuck in traffic. Dublin was the 3rd worst city in the world for congestion, the 3rd worst. In my own constituency of Fingal alone, as I said, there are 30,000 workers commuting from home to Dublin City. We know that more investment is needed. However, this alone won't solve the underlying causes of this unsustainable commuter flow. A right to flexible work and remote work is key to ending this commuter chaos once and for all. The development over the last 2 years in both information technology and the increased knowledge of how to use it has been a game changer, enabling many of us to work throughout the pandemic from our homes or local workplace hubs. These gains cannot be lost. They need to be built upon. That is why Labour is demanding the right to flexible work, to secure work and to decent work. Demand for remote and flexible work in Ireland is amongst the strongest in the OECD. Of those in employment who can work remotely, would like to do so when all pandemic restrictions are removed. However, due to the government's failure to enact a real right to flexible work, many have been hauled back to the office in recent weeks. These are the facts. These are the facts and the stories that I'm getting on the doors, that I'm getting through my office, and indeed my colleagues too. Indeed, if we're serious about lowering our emissions and meeting our climate targets, government needs to give more workers the power and choice to work from home or in their local community. Among the key gains from a rights-based approach to flexible work will be the cutting of climate emissions, maintaining a better work-life balance, reducing the cost of living, reducing transport congestion, and rejuvenating local communities. The local coffee shops and convenience stores in my town of Swords and in my constituency of Fingal spoke of how they no longer had to get by just on a couple of hours of peak time in the morning. They had a thriving lunchtime trade as workers who were working from home were able to nip down for their local coffee, their local sandwich to meet their friends in their own communities as opposed to within their industrial estate or in the city centre. Labour believes what is needed is a workers-first agenda, underpinned by job security and promoted by government, because the gains from a right to flexible work can only be measured on a society-wide and global level. Our motion, and indeed our legislation, which has been published by Senator Marie Sherlock, will embed the right to this flexibility from day one of employment, not as a reward for good behaviour once probation is passed, not as a perk. It would provide workers with the certainty of flexibility which is needed so that we can build a workplace that works for people and reflects the demands of modern living. The pandemic has shown us that a different work life is possible. Rather than a stressful commute, people can have flexibility to improve their productivity, their work-life balance, their air quality, and everything else in the list of far-reaching benefits that such an approach would bring. We've seen 15 years of change pushed into the last 2 years, but this government's wrong-headed approach to essentially give employers the right to refuse requests of flexible work will be shown to be on the wrong side of progress. It represents a step back in time, a return and a rigid fixation on the previous status quo. And this is after it's been proved over the last 2 years that there has been no decrease in productivity, that we haven't lost tax revenues, that we've actually been able to keep the economy going, that we've been able to keep money flowing into the public purse, to keep services going, all while remote work was enforced upon us by a pandemic. So this wrong-headed approach by government to roll this back and go back to the way it was is one of the most regressive moves by a government in recent times. That is why the Labour Party wants to create this right to flexible work, which is in the best interest of workers, it's in the best interest of families, it's in the best interest of local communities and in the best interest of our environment. The heart of our motion, and indeed the heart of our bill, is people's physical and mental health, workplace safety and job security. If workers are working from home, the provisions of the Organisation of Working Time Act still apply in terms of breaks and rest periods. This cannot change. Remote and flexible working is going to be a reality for the long term. It is the future. The future is here now. We cannot go back. We need to look at the options for working within communities, which is a useful option for people who must commute long distances, whether from the suburbs and hinterlands of our major cities or from even further afield. There are people who travel halfway across the country every day to work. This way of life burns people out long before their time. We need to consider how we can provide workspaces in local communities, towns and villages, and I acknowledge that some efforts have been made by government in this regard, but it still seems piecemeal and being led by the private sector and not a proper state-led approach. But such workspaces, such work hubs, such facilities would enable people to leave the house on foot using active travel measures and engage in their job of work in the centre of their local towns and villages. This might be done via hot desking or short-term lets of industrial and retail units in towns. The repurposing of buildings such as old Garda stations, old credit unions, these are all options, places that have the infrastructure already in place for modern work. It would help to regenerate towns as money would circulate in local economies and continue to be spent on main streets as it happened over the last couple of years. It would be good for the environment, it would be good for people's mental health, because they would not be working from the end of their beds or in otherwise cramped conditions in their home. Because we do acknowledge, and we have been raising this throughout the pandemic, that working from home in and of itself is not the answer. The facilities have to be there. We can't have people working in cramped bedrooms. Some people are able to have a home office, some people are able to repurpose their shed or have an outbuilding, but an awful lot of people are unable to do so. People who are in house shares with people who may work on shift, having to keep their voice down when they're on the phone. These are the practicalities of it, which can be resolved if we have the option of community work. A debate on flexible working arrangements is currently taking place all around the world, and we cannot miss this opportunity to introduce strong flexible work legislation because of the huge cost of living benefits in areas such as transport and climate. People being pushed back into overcrowded buses and trains, Minister, which fares that are very expensive, into their cars, which have increased fuel costs as we have been discussing for the last number of weeks and are reaching some form of crystallisation point today in the Dáil. This is an example of regression where we have an opportunity here with government for progress. Please take it. If flexible work arrangements are to be introduced in any fashion, a flexible work ticket for public transport will be required. Myself and Deputy Nash have been raising this since long before the pandemic reached its current point, and the fact that the government haven't stood up to the mark in relation to the flexible tax saver ticket is another example of just not putting the worker first, not putting the people first. Half-price fares for those aged under 24 have also been promised, but have been held up with some kind of nebulous technical difficulties. Since the 2019 Fingal by-election, we have been talking about flexible work in this party, in putting it on a statutory footing in a very real way, and the need for government to develop a proper plan for commuters, for workers, for people working from home, for regenerating rural towns and villages, and having people being able to live and work there. Flexible and secure work is the lifeblood for that to be a success. I would ask this government in their response to acknowledge the bill that we have through Marie Sherlock and to support this motion that we have before the House today, and to actually take a real lead in providing a real right to flexible and remote work.
Impossible, for all the reasons that we've heard for years, overnight became possible. Working from home, flexible working, working online, a new work-life balance, things that were unachievable, undoable because of necessity, not only were doable, but worked. They worked. The discourse for the last couple of months was that all has changed permanently, because we'd learned from the last 2 years how we can do things differently and better. And there's no going back to what existed before. But listening to the Minister's comments today, clearly that is not the case. Options are to be provided, but only where they suit the employer. Otherwise not. And that's at the core of it. Because, Lascan Corley, we know only too well how easy it is to revert to the way things were always done. That's the convenient, the simple way. Many of the changes, for example, that came about in banking after our economic crash, that we swore that we would learn from and never revert to, are now being put back on the agenda. The structure of bank bonuses, the structure of performance pay, the oversight of banking activities. So it's very easy for lessons to be unlearned, for important changes to be undone, if it suits those who can influence policy in this state. So in my view, and in the view of the Labour Party, Lascan Corley, it is timely now, before the important work lessons of COVID are unlearned, to establish those learnings in concrete terms in law. And that's the objective of the motion before the House, and it's set out in meaningful terms in the legislation published by our colleague, Senator Marie Sherlock. If work could be done remotely during the pandemic, surely it's reasonable to conclude that it can continue to be done in that fashion forever, if that suits the workers concerned. Of course, the fundamental change in work practices instantly brought about by the pandemic had to be instituted in many cases without proper preparation. I hear what the Minister has said. We all know that. We needed to put in preparation. We needed to have the supports. We needed to provide the equipment to do the job. How much better the outcomes would be, much better than the successes of the last 2 years, if we now made proper and thorough preparations to ensure efficient broadband was available, for example, offered access across the nation to work hubs in every county, easily accessible, reachable. If we made proper preparation for those willing and able to work from home, with equipment and basic equipment, I'm talking about desks and chairs and so on, suitable PCs. Because you're right, Minister, people did work on an emergency basis, using, sideboards or even ironing boards in some instances. But doing it properly and preparing it properly would be transformational. Our work patterns of the last couple of decades have seen tens of thousands of commuters leaving counties such as my own to commute to Dublin. From as early as 5:30 in the morning, the M11 and many other roadways see the daily commute, with the obvious impact for thousands, hundreds of thousands of families. Men and women getting up, leaving their children into creches or into childminders at the crack of dawn and not seeing them again for most of the day. And the human and family impact is readily understandable. The environmental impact, carbon emissions, equally so. If we have people spending hours daily needlessly in their cars, burning fuel, causing congestions, which adds to the cost, not only for themselves, but for other road users and for the economy, why can't we change that? But we now face a new reality has been instanced. Many of the people I'm talking about simply can't afford that commute. They can't afford to put that fuel in their cars. The 2-litre fuel price is making work unaffordable, and few would predict that matters will improve anytime soon. I want to give way to my colleague, but this motion is timely, important. I hope it will be accepted.
Guramahagat Las Cown Corla, and I just want to commend my colleagues, Deputies Jed Nash and Duncan Smith, for proposing this important motion, and I'm proud to speak in support of it. And indeed, I also want to just pay tribute to Senator Marie Sherlock, our colleague who's done so much on enshrining a right to flexible working into law. And also, I suppose, Minister, just to acknowledge that how fortunate we all are to be able to stand here in a peaceful Parliament debating this issue while bombs are raining down on the people of Ukraine. And just to say, as I know we all do, that we stand in solidarity with them at their darkest hour. As Deputy Howlin has said, COVID has indeed changed the nature of work for us all in Ireland, and we have seen a new way of working emerge. Pre-pandemic, many of us took for granted a form of work that emphasised presenteeism, the jacket on the back of the chair, the fact that people were expected to be in the office at all hours, and accompanying that awful daily ritual of the lengthy early morning commute for so many, a commute for which was unpaid and which was time taken out of people's family days and people's lives. So the pandemic has afforded us a great opportunity, therefore, to reset priorities, to ensure and enshrine in law a right to flexible working that will benefit all of us, men and women, individuals, families, and indeed local communities. And I do just want to emphasise the importance that a genuine right to flexible work would have for women. Speaking the morning after International Women's Day, Minister, we can, I think, all acknowledge that women in particular will stand to gain from a genuine right to flexible work. The Central Bank has noted that women's participation in the Irish labour force increased by 3.5 percentage points since the pandemic began. And while it's true to say that during the pandemic many women continued to bear the lion's share of caring responsibilities and unpaid domestic responsibilities in the home, it's also the case that the opportunity to engage in hybrid working or remote working did enable more women to participate in the workforce, and indeed enabling men to work from home also enabled men to take up more responsibilities as fathers and as carers in the workplace. So this could have great feminist benefits too, not just for women but for men. And we are all conscious, I think, of the benefit for the environment too that a genuine right to flexible work can afford us. We saw a reduction in carbon emissions during the lockdowns. We heard many of us in Dublin city constituencies hearing for the first time the clarity of bird songs on the street. While climate action, of course, requires a great deal more than a right to remote working, genuinely more people being enabled to work from home will mean less traffic, fewer polluting cars on our roads, and better air quality for all of us. And at a time of serious concerns about energy security, it will of course also reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. We know also, as Deputy Smith has outlined, that the growth of local communities was greatly strengthened and enabled during COVID, and quality of life improved for many people who were able to move out of city centre locations and work from home in areas where perhaps they were closer to family and closer to their original local communities. So all of these benefits are clear from a genuine right to remote work, as we are proposing in this motion and in our legislation that Marie Sherlock has been drafting. And yet in the government's bill, unfortunately, rather than a right to request remote work, this is in fact more effectively a right to refuse for employers. As Deputy Nash has said, it's a toothless and anemic piece of legislation. The right to refuse effectively undermines and countermands that right to request that it is apparently supposed to provide. The government has failed to include within the legislation, within the draft bill, a presumption that if work has been done remotely during the pandemic, then it is reasonably practical to expect it to continue to be done remotely, or at least to give employees and workers the option to work remotely and to work in a hybrid fashion. We know that the majority of people in Ireland do wish to see this right to remote work and a more hybrid model of work enshrined into law and embedded in our policy going into the future, and that it shouldn't just be seen as something that was unique to the pandemic, it should be seen as something that we can provide for permanently. Labour has had a long record on working on workers' rights. Our Working from Home Bill in 2020 would have given workers the right to statutory switch off, and that again must be taken along with the right to remote working. We have also pushed for a Donna O'Malley moment in childcare to ensure a universal public scheme of childcare, and that too must accompany a genuine package of measures to enable more women to take part in the workforce and in public life, and to enable all workers to have a better quality of life. Minister, it would benefit all of us, workers, families and communities. I urge you to accept the motion.
Míle buíochas.
Agus ag roinnt le
An Oireachtas. Míle buíochas. I welcome the motion. I support the motion. I think if the government was to read the motion properly, it says that it rejects the inadequate government proposals in its right to request a remote work bill on the grounds that they fail to provide that access to flexible work should be the default entitlement and not the exception, and that it fails to include a presumption that if work has been done remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is reasonably practicable for it to continue to be done remotely. What we're arguing for here, and I think what the opposition, the unanimous approach of the opposition here, is to reflect the fact that in Irish society that there has been a paradigm shift, and that paradigm shift has had a major benefit, particularly for women. And I'll give you a practical example, Minister, of somebody who works, a woman who works in the pharmaceutical sector. She is a lone parent. During the COVID pandemic, she attained a promotion. Her employer is now saying to her that she is expected to do overnights in other parts of the country. You're with me so far, Minister? Female employer, female employee, pharma sector, highly skilled, highly educated. She's just been promoted. If she received a promotion during the pandemic and she didn't have to travel out and she was able to take care of her childcare arrangements, surely be to goodness there should be some right now for that person to continue to work as she is and not have to do those overnights, because there is a risk now, Minister, that she will have to leave that job because she cannot take care of her childcare arrangements. All we are trying to do here on this is to instill a presumption in favour of the right to have a flexible arrangement. And if nothing else, it's to ensure that lone parents in particular who want to work but who can't work at present because of their childcare arrangements would be given that opportunity, such as the person I'm talking about there, to be able to do so. Your legislation, with all due respect to you, Minister English, your legislation is yanking that out of the equation. It's weak. It's too weak. And the paradigm shift has occurred, and you'll see that in your own commute into these houses of the Oireachtas from your own place of wherever you reside, and Minister Troy before you when he's travelling along the M4, will see that people are back on the road again, going into work. The whole place is snarled up, and many of those people would be just as productive working from home or having that flexibility. But your legislative proposal is too weak, and we would argue that your legislation, the bill, fails to live up to the ambitions of the remote work strategy published last year. You've watered it down. That's our contention here. So give women a chance, women and men, but give women a chance who have attained some autonomy, who've been able to come back into the workplace, who have attained promotions, who otherwise would not be promoted because of that pull towards the need to provide childcare and the domestic arrangements that they have. Give them a chance, but embed it in as a right. And we see as well that
female full-time employment has risen by an impressive 7.5% in a 2-year period between the end of 2019 and 2021. And we know that is as a result of the pandemic, because people were able to make more flexible arrangements. So that's all we're asking for here, Minister English. And for some bit of common sense, there is a massive opportunity here to understand the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist at the moment is that people want flexible working time, but they want it instilled as a right. And our motion, I think, speaks to that.
We want to thank very much all those deputies across the House who have supported our motion, and indeed to commend the work of Senator Marie Sherlock, who, on looking at the government's proposals, did commit to producing her own piece of legislation, which she's now pursuing. The government's own proposals to wait 26 weeks before you can actually ask to work remotely, and then another 12 weeks before you get a decision, a full pregnancy of 38 weeks before you actually might get your right. It goes to the heart, actually, of all workers' rights legislation we feel in this republic, that you can ask, you have the right to ask, but sure, you know, it'll always be the employer's right to say no. It feels, ministers, if you handed your legislation over to IBEC, asked them to script it for you, and came back in here and are slightly surprised that people have an issue with it. We had a roundtable organised by Marie Sherlock, and at that roundtable we heard from Orla O'Connor of the National Women's Council, we heard from Liam Burney of ICTU, Louise Bayliss of Spark, the Financial Services Union, Garrett Murphy, the Disability Federation of Ireland, represented by Flach Phelan, and indeed Dr. Alan Hustis, all saying the same thing. So we need to grasp this opportunity that has been presented to us during the pandemic. Now, by the way, we're not suggesting that a young worker does not want to go into the workplace. I can appreciate that somebody who is starting out in life may have housing difficulties, accommodation difficulties. Working from home is not something that is really an option for them. Working at the end of the bed is not something that they're really going to want to grasp that opportunity, if you like. But if in good faith, a worker has the opportunity to work from home, why do we always have to place all the power indeed in the hands of the employer once again? It's as if there's a lack of trust at the heart of Irish legislation, that the worker will always try, if you like, not to be honest. But if we're honest with ourselves as a legislative body, we would appreciate that the productivity of the worker would improve if they didn't have to have this treadmill of traffic congestion, of rush and push in the morning, of being able to deal with childcare arrangements. And indeed, it is a gender equality issue as well, to encourage more women into the workplace and to seek empowerment there as well. It does absolutely go hand in hand, Minister. It absolutely goes hand in hand with the right to switch off, because we cannot have a scenario in Irish workplaces, be those workplaces at home or in the traditional work setting, where somebody is constantly contactable, where they don't have the right to switch off, where they have to be expected to receive a message or an email at any hour of the day or night. So what we're trying to do, Minister, is to expose the fact that what you have brought forward in terms of your right to flexible working legislation is actually the right of an employer to say no. You have effectively 38 weeks before a worker can get a decision, and the reasons for refusal are so wide as to make the legislation effectively powerless when it comes from the worker's perspective. So, Minister, what we would say to you is that in good faith, the Labour Party have been working assiduously on this. Senator Marie Sherlock, as our workers' rights spokesperson, has been drafting legislation. She has correctly pointed out the issues in your legislation. In fact, here, a number of weeks ago, the Taoiseach said to me that indeed some employers weren't happy with the bill either. So it's quite clear that effectively nobody on either side, workers or employers, necessarily are impressed with government legislation. So what we want to do, Minister, is to say this much. You cannot have a situation where somebody has to wait 26 weeks before they can apply to work remotely. You cannot have a ridiculous situation where they have to wait 12 weeks to get an answer. And you cannot have the rights of refusal from an employer to be so broad as to make the legislation effectively worthless. As my colleague Deputy Sean Sherlock has said, it is a gender equality issue, it's a workers' rights issue, and it is taking from the pandemic all what we have learned from the pandemic and bringing it into the mainstream of the workplace and workers' rights into the future. I will say this much, and I hope the Taoiseach might listen to this, and representatives from the government might listen to this. My greatest regret of 10 years ago, the previous disaster, if you like, the previous crisis, is that we didn't learn enough from the financial collapse and build a more robust economy which is built around workers' rights and built around human interaction. We have an opportunity now, having learned from what's happened in the pandemic, to do things an awful lot better, and that's why we proposed the motion. We don't just want you to support the motion as you are, we want you to work on it and make your legislation better.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Reilly. Private member's motion then regarding flexible and remote working